Hi, I'm Alex from DIY Composites. In this video today, we're going to use the infusion process to make a carbon fibre heel rest for this Sim Dynamics simulator rig. We're going to use a mould that we made in our previous tutorial, so if you haven't seen that, make sure to check it out. The resin infusion process is a great component manufacturing process. The component and cloth is held under vacuum, which helps it conform to the mould surface really well, and also it gives fantastic surface finish results. It's suitable for small and large components. We're going to be using our DIY composite range of materials, and full processing information for all of those is available on our website. Make sure to like and subscribe to our channel if you want to see more composite videos like this. So this is our finished mould from the previous tutorial that we made using the DIY Eco Mould system. You'll see that it's an infusion mould and we've made it long and left ourselves plenty of space around the periphery for our infusion ancillaries and all our bagging materials. Also, by being a long length, it means that we can cure a longer piece and then chop it into the individual components that we want. Our mould's been sealed using DIY Tool Sealer 12, and now it's just time to add our release agent, and we're going to use our DIY Let Go semi-permanent release agent. We're using a microfiber cloth to carefully apply our DIY Let Go release agent across the entire mould surface. For a fresh mould like this, that's going to be 6 applications as per the datasheet instructions, and we're careful to make sure that no application of release agent goes under where the vacuum bag TT150 bagging tape border will be. So now we're going to use our DIY TT150 vacuum bagging tape to work ourselves around the periphery of our mould, which is what we'll later attach our vacuum bag to. By doing this, it also helps us to define our work area inside the mould space. Work yourself around the mould periphery with the bagging tape. Firmly push it down as you go. For any sharp corners you get to, cut the tape, peel back the backing, overlap a new piece and continue in the direction of travel. Our tape border is now added to the mould surface, and we've made sure there's no debris around that could spoil the surface of our part. So it's now time to put our surface ply in. It's really worth taking a bit of time at this point because the surface ply is the first thing you'll see in the finished component. We're going to use our DIY HQ DC veil-backed twill cloth. The veil backing stabilises the cloth weave, making it far easier to handle without the risk of distortion. You'll see in our example here, the veil-back cloth weave is barely moved when roughly handled compared to the standard 200 gram cloth. It's perfect for moulds with flatter surfaces and no compound curves. We're carefully rolling out our material onto the mould surface and using a little bit of flash tape just to tack it down into position on the mould. We're being careful to make sure that there's enough material to reach into all the corners and that there's no possibility of the material bridging away from the mould surface. So our surface ply is now tacked into position in the mould, and it's time to add our main reinforcement. We're going to use 3 plies of our DIY HQ DC 650 gram twill cloth. Add your bulking ply onto the back of your surface ply and roll out across the mould. Make sure that there's enough material to go into all corners and edges of the mould and that there's no bridging with the laminate beneath. Work your way around the mould and cut any loose fibres that could interfere with the vacuum bagging process. With our cloth now in the mould, it's time to start thinking about the vacuum bagging stack, which is going to sit on top of it, allowing the resin to flow through the part and also pulling the cloth down onto the mould surface. The first step is a peel ply, which is going to sit on the cloth surface, and once removed will leave a great textured finish ideal for secondary bonding. Next up is an optional step, which is a perforated release film. By adding this, it will just make removal of the remainder of the bagging stack far easier. Critically, the next step is our Infusion Mesh. This is the pathway with which the resin is going to flow through the piece. And the final step is the vacuum bag, which goes on top of it all and pulls it all down tightly onto the mould surface. First into the mould is the peel ply layer. Add this onto the surface of the laminate below. Try not to crease, but just make sure there's enough material to go into all the shapes and corners of the mould, as it won't stretch. If it bridges, it will hold off the bagging stack from above. To help position the peel ply, it's acceptable to use tape just to tack down the edges to the mould. Because of the simple shape of our part, we're not going to use the perforated release film on top of the peel ply. Instead, we're going to go straight to adding our infusion mesh. The infusion mesh allows the resin to travel across the mould surface during the infusion process. Just as with the peel ply, use tape to tack the mesh into place. The resin infusion process relies on allowing resin into the vacuum bag and using vacuum pressure to push it across the mould, infusing the laminate as it goes. We use spiral wrap to help disperse the resin as it enters the bag into the mesh. We're going to place a spiral wrap here on the entry side and here on the exit of the bag. We're inserting our T-piece connectors into the spiral wrap to make it easier to allow resin to flow into and out of the bag. Tack the spiral wrap down onto the mesh using tacky tape. We've now placed our inlet spiral and outlet spiral at either end of the mould. You can see that our outlet sat on this blue material, which is our optional DIY one-way membrane. In a traditional resin infusion, once the laminate's wet out, the inlet line and the outlet line are shut off, and you rely completely on the integrity of the vacuum bag to keep the laminate onto the mould surface. Any loss in vacuum pressure can lead to part scrappage. By using this membrane, it means the inlet is locked off, but the outlet can still continue to have a vacuum drawn and air is drawn from the bag, but no resin will leave the bag. It's now time to add our vacuum bag onto our mould. It's important that the vacuum bag is oversized so that there's enough bagging material to vacuum down onto the contours below. In our example, we're tacking the bag down to each of the 4 corners of the mould, before then working from the centre of each length out to the outside, which will leave an excess of bag which needs to be closed out with a pleat. You can close a pleat in the vacuum bag by adding an additional piece of tacky tape from the mould flange all the way up the open bag and closing out by hand. We've now closed out all of our pleats, and it's now time to breech the vacuum bag so we can connect our resin inline and our resin catch pot to the outline and vacuum pump. We're using a sharp blade to pierce the surface of the bag before pushing it over the top of our T-piece connector. Use vacuum bagging tape to create a tight seal around the connector and then add your resin in and resin out lines. We're using our range of simple push-fit infusion fittings. So our infusion setup is now fully plumbed. We've got our quarter-turn lock-off valves on our resin in and resin out line, and we're connected to our resin catch pot and vacuum pump, so it's time to draw our first full vacuum. We've now drawn full vacuum on our bag. We've made sure that we have enough bagging material into the corners so that the laminate is really consolidated against the mould. We did have a leak over here, which we've sealed with TT150 bagging tape, and now we have a great seal. The next job is we need to conduct a 30-minute purge of the bag to make sure that all of the air is out, and we can do a 30-minute drop test. Even though we are using DIY infusion membrane, good vacuum bagging technique is still important in getting a good result. We've now completed our 30-minute purge of the bag to get rid of any air. We then disconnected from the vacuum source and have done a 30-minute drop test to make sure we have a good bag. The next step is to open the valve here and see if we get any movement on the needle. Nothing changed, so we know we have a really good vacuum bag and it's time to mix our resin. It's really important when mixing your resin to mix it accurately by weight and to make sure that there's no unmixed resin around the bottom or the sides of the mixing cup. To help calculate how much resin you need, visit our website in the guides and tutorial section where our written resin infusion guide shows you how to make your calculation. Okay, we're all mixed and ready to infuse. The vac pump's going to go on, and the last job we need to do is we're going to carefully prime the resin inline. Once the line is primed, then leave the bag for another 2 to 3 minutes to purge, and then you can open the valve and commence your infusion. It took us around 41 minutes to complete our infusion, well within the pot life of our IN24 resin. It would also be possible to infuse up the mould surface instead of across, but it all depends on your infusion strategy, shape and size of your part. If you have any concern about your resin exotherming before entering the vacuum bag, then consider our slow hardener and potentially mixing and adding your resin in batches to the resin in pot. So our infusion is complete now. Our laminate is fully wet out and we've locked off our resin in line. Now we'll leave it to cure for 24 hours on vac. This is the point where if we weren't using the infusion membrane, you'd have to lock off your resin outline and depend on the integrity of your vacuum bag to keep the laminate consolidated to the mould surface. 24 hours has now passed and it's time to remove our vacuum bag. This is easily done by pulling from one corner. As you can see, our DIY infusion membrane has worked really well and there is no resin at all in our resin outline. With our vacuum baggie and infusion ancillaries removed from the mould, it's time to pop our component off and check out the surface finish. Because of the relatively simple shape of our mould, getting it off I think should be quite easy, so I'm going to work my way around, release it, and then concentrate on removing the peel ply and infusion mesh. So with our part now out of the mould, it's time to concentrate on removing the peel ply and infusion mesh. The infusion mesh carries quite a large resin weight, so it can be a little bit tricky to get out, but by taking the peel ply with it, they should come out together. It can be quite sharp in places, so we're going to use gloves, and we're going to try and remove it in strips from the component. With our peel ply and infusion mesh all removed, it's now the point where if you wish, you can give your part a post-cure. In our instance here, we've just added a masking tape border so that we've now got trim lines to trim to get our final heel rest ready for fitment onto the simulator. Our component's now had its final trim and final polish and it looks fantastic. We've fitted it up to the sim rig and we're delighted with the results. For more videos like this, make sure to like and subscribe and also check out Sim Dynamics online. All of the materials used in this video are available to buy on our website on the Resin Infusion page of the guides and tutorials section.